My name is Steve Penner. I'm a pastor here at First Mennonite Church in Reedley, California. It's an old church. It's been around since 1906. And I've been a pastor here since 1999. And for a long time, our church is a Mennonite congregation, so part of the historic Peace Churches, has forever had an abiding interest in peace building and peacemaking and how can we be people of God's just peace in our world. And that's expressed itself in different ways across the years. Acts of service, deeds of justice, words of salvation. So back, it was probably over 30 some years ago, our church caught wind of the whole victim offender reconciliation movement and being cognizant of issues in the criminal justice system. It's kind of a world that we had few connections with and had no particular way of speaking into other than observing that high incarceration rates for some racial ethnic groups and our own, we were a polite crowd far from the criminal justice system. But we're also teachers and members of our community who became aware of kids in the course of our lives facing issues with the justice system. Back in the 70s, this whole idea of restorative justice started to percolate within our circles, Mennonite circles largely. And the idea of could we work at resolving conflict in restorative ways as opposed to retributive ways. And this idea kind of captured our imagination. So when the Victim Offender Reconciliation Program gravitated to California and particularly to Fresno County, our congregation was interested in this idea and receptive to hearing more and perhaps wondering what we as individuals might do. So a number of people, including myself, were trained as mediators through a simple 8-10 hour very basic mediation course offered by VORP, and we became duly vetted as VORP mediators. So every now and then we get a call from the office in Fresno announcing that there's a case, would you be interested in taking it? And different ones of us took cases and did these pretty low-level VORP cases. In the meantime, some of the leaders in the county program of the Fresno VORP were getting involved in more higher level and exploring the outer limits of how far can you take restorative justice. It's one thing, a little graffiti case, but it's another thing when somebody gets really beat up or, God forbid, somebody gets killed. Can restorative justice work in real serious cases? So we were interested intellectually in that, but in practice, at a congregational level, it was much more low level. Fast forward a few years, right here in our own congregation, we had a young man in our church who was part of our youth group of our church. And this was in the late 2000s. Went to Mennonite youth conventions, part of our church, but in the wee hours of a February morning a number of years ago, there was a murder in our town. And eventually the kid from our church was picked up, and eventually there was a trial. He was tried as a juvenile and was convicted. He's in jail right now. And that case sort of brought some of these criminal justice things, especially those of us who knew the kid well, were impacted by that. Here in our community, our relationship with the police, the law enforcement of our community was sort of a polite, respectful, but kind of a guarded distance from the world that the guy on the street, police officer, knows. We did our thing, the police had to do their job. And some of us older folks who come out of the 60s were probably a little bit standoffish vis-a-vis the police, to be honest. At the same time, understanding these guys are on the front lines, somebody's getting beat up in a house, they're the ones standing at the door trying to deal with it, not nice people like me. But we had this VORP thing, so we had some tentative involvement with mediation cases, restorative justice, a little community, just one part of the larger Reedley community. But people here had an interest. If you're talking about trying to build restoration and build peace among young people in our community, young people in police, young people in the criminal justice system, we're interested in that idea. And we are on the side of, can we, in any kind of conflict situation, find ways of building restoration, as opposed to saying we must just come down hard on the bad people. And we preach peace to, we think the Israelis ought to be able to get along with the Palestinians, and the Sudanese ought to figure that out. The Rwandans and the Tutsis and the Hutus, all these conflict situations far away, we were always the ones saying, and standing on street corners saying, let's don't fight our country and with the Iraqis, our country with the Afghans. No, we should build peace. So then this idea gets close to us here in Reedley, and we're sort of confronted. Okay, we preach that to other places. Are we willing to be in the middle of the messy work of trying to build peace with people right here in our community? And we said yes, we should do that. So and John and Sherry, people like that, helped us to. They built a system that we were eager to be part of, and we were on the ground floor of through our Reedley Peace Center. We offered a training. Mediators were trained here in Reedley, and so we have a cadre of people who are trained as mediators with this simple little 8-10 hour training to mediate cases. Our group meets together once a month, every other month, and sort of shares ideas. It's brought us closer to the police department, and we're so grateful the way our local police department has caught hold of this idea, believes in restorative justice. Admittedly, it's, the belief starts first at the top and then has to find its way down to the grassroots police officer. And but that is only growing here in our community. Lots of our schools, our school district leaders are on board and interested in applying principles of restorative justice in the classroom and in the school settings. Reedley Peace Building Initiative, RPBI, has been around for about 3 years here in Reedley. And so all of us who were trained under VORP, it's basically the VORP model, the VORP thing done here in our community, and we give it our own name, RPBI. And it reflects this close collaboration between people like from our church, our Reedley Peace Center, but particularly West Coast MCC and the Reedley Police Department, the local school district. Those are the major players in this partnership in our community. And I don't have statistics in hand. My understanding is from what people who know more than I say, they declare that it has helped in a tangible, statistically viable way, showing that crime rates are gradually diminishing a bit. And I think that it's each time you handle a case, you're building a small bit of peace in our community. John gave me a case maybe over a year ago now that involved a kid at the local high school who'd been caught in the school office with some grass. So you don't bring marijuana to school. He's in trouble, and he's a young guy at the school and sort of trying to get his life together, but at a vulnerable time of life. So he's the offender, but we don't really have a per se victim in a case like that. So it's not like I throw up some graffiti on your garage door. Clearly I'm the offender, you're the victim. Here, the victim is sort of nebulous. But RPBI has been really good about trying to figure out how do we resolve cases like that where there's no clearly identifiable victim. So what we do is we create victims panels. And some of the people in our church and in our community here are not willing to be a mediator, but are willing to be a member of a victim panel. That they're sort of surrogate victims, and they play the role of a victim in talking to the offender. So they represent the community. So in my case, we got some really good students, older students, to represent the school community. So I had the offender, the young offender, and 3 junior, senior high school surrogate victims, the victim panel, we call it. So we had this really good time of interaction, and the victims could talk about, they could talk as fellow high school students to this kid. They could talk about what kind of school I want this to be. They could talk about opportunities the school offers. They ask the kid, what are your interests? They find out his interests, and for every interest, they have something, a place in the school dynamic where this kid could potentially plug in. And so you talk back and forth. The offender tells his story. The victim's panel has to repeat back what he said, and vice versa. So everybody has a chance to express and really articulate what the person on the other side of the table is thinking and feeling and expressing. And at the end, you drop a contract. These are the things we agree to. Everybody signs their name, and we go home, and it goes over to John Swinning to kind of follow up on the case in the months to come. And this case, I think, has made some reasonable progress from what I understand. But what that then does, on the one hand, for the victims panel, it gives these kids, again, a real sense of, of vulnerable people on their campus. These tended to be AP students, they're taking calculus, and this kid is down there on the lower end of the school academic strata. So it builds relationships within the school community. And the same thing, I had another case with a victims panel where kids broke some windows. So we had to create a victims panel for that. And it gives the victims a chance to humanize the offender. And, you can sort of say, well, you can sort of get into the life of that person and identify to some modest level, at least, with what they're experiencing. And it's also a chance to be sort of parental and big brotherly and giving counsel and advice. And for the offender, you have a chance that there's people who listen to me, who don't seem to be just judging me and coming down on me hard. It gives me an opportunity to express what I did, to own my misdeeds. So I think there's something good about confession. There's something really spiritually good about confessing one's sins and saying, this is what I did, there it is. I admit it. And then when you're not slapped down, but instead a hand reaches out to you that tries to pull you up and help you move along, it's a beautiful thing. So though that dynamic happening over and over, stitch by stitch, puts together, creates, the kind of fabric we want here in our community. We mediators have a little small part of it. School principals, school teachers, school counselors, the police department, these are big players in helping to make this work. But I just think that spreading that idea of restorative justice everywhere helps in the particular case, but then each individual who's involved in that dynamic can then in turn apply it in their own lives, somewhere in your family, right in your home, in your family, your church, your service club, wherever you are. These ideas kind of infiltrate our world. So it's a cool thing.